maybe this is for the engineer. The edge of the building on the western side and the space given to have a fully grown tree next to it seems rather unattainable in my eyes without either damage to the building or to the tree.
I don't foresee a conflict of the trees that are proposed in that area.
Okay. My next question is on the rendering that was shown earlier from a street side view of the project. Mike, if you could bring that back, I can explain my question a little better. My question was that rendering does not seem to be yes.
Exhibit A9,
thank you.
The rendered streetscape, is that what you're referring to?
Yes. What I'm strictly noticing is the lack of the two buildings in the back in this rendering. Why is that not displayed in the rendering, knowing full fact that that is proposed and part of the application?
The rendering and exhibit that's shown here, if you notice the date is actually March 31st of 2017. This was one of the initial concepts that were developed, or that was developed to discuss the plan and the proposal at that point. The purpose of this was specific to the streetscape and what the impact of that streetscape would be. There wasn't an indication or the addition of townhomes in behind this row of units, and I guess there may be the potential that it would be visible in this area, but I'm not sure that the row of units behind would be visible from the street in this specific perspective.
Given the slope of that, why would it not be visible from the street? And why is the drawing not accurate to the application that's being submitted?
Again, this was an exhibit that was prepared well in advance of the full engineering plans and all the drawings to depict the streetscape conditions and the proposal of the street wall in relation to the street. So since this exhibit was prepared, the additional more detailed exhibits, including the engineering drawings, the landscape plan, were prepared, are more consistent and true to
that certainly seems like you're demonstrating one idea while the application being of another. In my eyes, the rendering should indicate or be accurate to the project being referred to, which would include the roofs, roof line of the buildings that are
There a question?
Why don't you ask him a question? Do you, and I'll ask it. Do you think, Mr. Seidel, that this rendering is not accurate in terms of whether or not you'll be able to see the second row of townhomes in the rear?
As I indicated in the perspective that's provided, there's the potential that the portion of the sky between the evergreen tree in the left-hand side in the foreground and the townhome in that area could be visible. However, I don't believe the view of the townhomes in the rear would overpower this view. There certainly is a topographic change, but from this perspective, being on the street and having the units as close to the street as they are, it would block the perspective view of the units behind it.
Is one of the subsequent witnesses going to address the elevation difference between the front and the second row, the first and the second row, the townhouses? I would think your engineer might be able to address that.
Our civil engineer can address that.
Anything further?
Yes, one more follow-up question. There is, right, this view demonstrates what the street view would look from 322. However, what is the view or the change in roofline view from Cherry Grove, or particularly my street, Wellesley Lane, based on the landscaping you have provided?
I'm sorry, can you restate that question?
Right. What will be the site impact that from Cherry Grove Lane? We can arguably see some of it here in your street view, but what is the similar impact from Cherry Grove Lane and Wellesley Lane?
I don't have a specific answer for you because I don't know the specific location of your home, what the elevation is, what window you may be looking out of. There are existing white pines along that property line in certain areas. The elevation of the proposed units in the rear would be set down several feet in elevation compared to where the rear property line is. So there would be a reduction in grade from the first floor of the townhomes as compared to the property line.
Does your landscaping plan provide mitigation for those view obstructions that will be created as part of the project?
Yes, I believe it does.
How many years? We're putting in 6-foot trees.
It has to be a question that the court reporter can hear.
How many years before the landscaping that you're putting in will be mature enough that it will provide adequate, screening, privacy from the development?
Again, without knowing the specific locations of the dwellings, the property, views in that locations, I can't say.
How about the property right behind it?
Again, I'm not sure of, I haven't visited that property. I haven't been on there to understand what the topography is and the elevations of specific to that property.
But you have visited the site.
I have.
Mr. Seidel, how tall are the trees that are shown on, I guess it's exhibit A13 in the rear? At maturity, what is the height of those proposed trees?
Sorry, when you said the exhibit, you were referring to the landscape plan, correct? Mature height of trees that are in that area, 50 to 60 feet in height for some of them. We provided the deciduous trees, which are red maples, that will grow to a 50 to 60 feet height. We've underplanted them with shrubs to provide an understory. We've also provided a series of evergreen trees that will grow. Some of the species will grow a little bit faster than others. Some of them will grow to a height of 50 feet at maturity.
Okay.
So the red maples in the corner, you said that they'd be about 12 feet when you plant them?
Approximately 12 to 14 feet, yes.
And how quickly do they grow on average in just average soil with average conditions?
I'm not sure how to provide.
How fast does the tree grow? I mean, I'm just curious. Ballpark it.
In the early stages of red maples that I have planted at my house, they have grown 3 feet a year since I planted them.
3 feet?
Yeah.
Okay. I was told by Rouse Chamberlin that they grow about a foot per year, and that was based off of what you had told us. So is it a foot or is it 3 feet?
I didn't indicate a foot. What I indicated is younger plants, 2-inch caliper, the size like this, I believe could grow as quickly as 3 feet a year.
Best case scenario. So to
On
reach
average.
the 50 to 60 feet that you referenced could take 10 to 15 years?
Yes,
Best case scenario.
on average.
So in about 10 to 15 years, we should have adequate buffering.
I think that he's answered.
Yeah, I don't think that's what the question was. He didn't answer because he doesn't know the elevations of your property, but I think your point is made. think, and the other question is, I mean, did you ask the question if they meet the ordinance? I mean, I think that's what's relevant to a certain extent. Our ordinance has, the township ordinance has specifications for the quantity, the types of trees, and the DBH at planting. So I think that's what the township code can require.
Correct, and to answer that question, yes, I believe that was one of the first questions that was asked. To the plants that are provided, the landscaping that is provided addresses the height of the plants, the caliber of the plants, and the quantity that is required.
Scott Brown again. My last question. Do you find that white pines would be a viable option for these pine trees that you're talking about? Well, you have not seen any of the neighboring Cherry Grove Lane backyards that go up to this property and this plan?
I have.
You have. Would you then consider a white pine, seeing our properties, a white pine as a viable option, long-term option for these?
There are white pines that are proposed on the plan.
On the property line, yes.
I just want to clarify what the plants are that are proposed back in this area, specifically along the property line. There is a form of eastern red cedar in terms of the evergreens. There are Leyland cypress that are provided in that area. Those are more fast-growing species. And then we're also providing Colorado spruce in this area.
Sorry.
The pines that are proposed are actually in this area here.
Do those trees that you had mentioned, that the spruce and cedars, do they have the same thinning effect over age that the white pines do?
No, they don't.
Will they overgrow and thin and interfere with each other's long-term growth?
No.
Okay, any other parties have questions? Please come forward with your microphone.
Is there an exact number of trees that are being proposed as installed and maintained?
Yes.
What is the total number of trees and that are being proposed in the application that to be maintained by the future HOA of the?
There are 41 deciduous trees, 81 deciduous shrubs, 41 evergreen trees, and 93 evergreen shrubs that are proposed with the plan.
And what is the mechanism that those quantities will be maintained?
I believe we've answered that question already. There will be an HOA. Mr. Penders testified to that.
And how is or what is the mechanism to enforce the number of the actual number of trees are?
I don't know if the ordinance has anything that requires a certain thing. Do you know?
My concern is that the future HOA could decide that those trees are not worth their time or cost at significant impact to the neighboring properties.
I don't think that that's an appropriate question for this witness, if it is a question.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. Scott, does the ordinance have any minimum period of time that the developer has to make sure that under our subdivision ordinances that the landscaping is maintained?
Once the plans are, once the development is completed, the developer will have 18-month maintenance bond after that time frame. So however long it takes to complete the development plus 18 months after that point.
Yeah, I mean, right. So there is an inspection period for the township, but as far as 20 years down the road, I mean, I think it's I'm not sure there's a way that can be guaranteed that those trees will always be there, but I think you have to look at it from the point of view that those residents will also want some buffering as well. So they may not want to be taking those down.
But
it's beneficial to both communities to have the buffering.
Agreed, but there is no way for the hopeful homeowners to enforce or.
Just like if you have trees on your property, there's no way for them to mandate that you keep those trees, right? It's vice versa. It goes both ways.
So my point I was making is that there's significant risk to the or I don't want to use the term value, but there's significant risk, at least to the sightline of the adjacent properties, or risk thereof in the future.
Understood. Any other questions from the parties?
I just have one more quick.
Please identify yourself again, just in case. And do you need a break at some point? Okay.
Just one more question for clarification. So, do you know what the timeline will be for the installation of the fence and also the installation of all the landscaping on the construction timeline?
No.
Appropriate for Mr. Penders to answer.
Okay.
I believe, as we had shared with you, our intention is to install the fence within the first 90 days of the site development. Get that in after our erosion and sediment controls are established on the property. The landscaping itself is going to get installed over the course of the build, because we have to do significant other disturbance in that area, so we have to hold off on that. So it won't all wait till the end of the project, but it's going to happen through the build out.
Okay. Any other parties have questions for Mr. Seidel? Okay, if not, and you don't need a break?
You need a break?
Yeah.
Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back on with your next two. You have two more, right?
How long do you guys typically?
All right, we are going to go back on the record, guys.
Next, I'd like to call Christopher Daly. Chris, could you please state your name and business address for the record, please?
My name is Christopher Daly, and I work with D.L. Howe & Associates, located at 1250 Wrights Lane, Westchester, PA 19380.
And are you the project engineer for the projects that is the subject of tonight's hearing?
Yes.
Are you a licensed professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yes.
And have you testified before various boards and commissions regarding zoning matters, including the East Brandywine Township?
Yes.
Do you have several years of experience preparing plans such as these for various types of developments in the southeastern region of Pennsylvania?
I do.
We have Mr. Daly's CV marked as Exhibit A15, and I'd like to offer him as an expert in civil engineering.
Board have any questions on his credentials, and will you accept him as an expert? Yes. Okay. He is admitted to speak as an expert, registered professional engineer.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the subject property and its features, the applicant's proposal, and the surrounding area?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the applicable regulations of the East Brandywine Township zoning ordinance to this project?
I am.
Were you responsible for the preparation of a conditional use plan dated June 14th, 2017, which is marked as part of Exhibit A1?
Yes.
And was that the initial plan that was filed with this application?
It was.
Are you also responsible for the preparation of Exhibit A5, the conditional use zoning compliance plan plotted April 17th, 2018, that's been referred to this evening?
Yes.
And did you update that plan and make changes in response to a Pannoni review letter that I believe was marked the day before?
B16.
B10, a letter dated July 7th, 2017.
Yes.
And did you also make changes to that plan based on B9, which is a letter from Andy Heinrich dated July 6th, 2017?
I did.
Okay. And before we walk through those changes, could you briefly explain to the board what's shown on Exhibit A5, the conditional use plan, and in particular, if you could point out where the sewer and water easements that have been the topic of conversation are, and what we're proposing to do with respect to those easements as part of this plan.
Yes, so as you can see, and I know we already talked about it, you got Horseshoe Pike down here, and then we have the 15 townhouse units. Right now, there's a sanitary line and a water line coming down along the eastern property line, and there's about, let me verify the size of this easement. Give me 1 second. About a 40-foot wide easement for both the water line and sanitary line running across the, or along the eastern property line. And the sanitary line right now comes down to this point here, and then it continues to the west onto the Guthriesville Plaza property, and the water line continues down into Horseshoe Pike.
And as part of this proposal, would those water and sewer lines, since a portion crosses over where improvements are shown, would they be relocated as part of this application?
They would.
And could you point out on Exhibit A5 generally where they would be, where that relocation would occur?
Yes, the water line will be rerouted along the northern property line here, come down into the private road, where it will then be conveyed back to the original tie-in point in Horseshoe Pike. And the sanitary line will then be rerouted along the, well, it will continue along the eastern property line to about this point here, where it hits the T, and then it'll continue into the private road, run down south, extend into the private drive, and then go into, tie into the location on Guthriesville Plaza.
So with respect to the width along the property line with the properties to the north, that generally, that dimension that you explained would remain the same?
Yes, it would.
Now turning back to more general comments and items that you addressed as part of this plan. You're familiar with Pannoni's review letter of July 7th, 2017, and did you make several changes to this plan as a result of that?
I did.
Can you walk through, generally speaking, those changes?
Yes, I can. Let me pull up that letter.
I believe Exhibit B16 references some of those changes. Just for purposes of the record, since we have a number of residents here, if you could just summarize what those are.
Sure. The first comment had to do with being in the Steep Slope Conservation District. We came in front of the Zoning Hearing Board and received the necessary zoning relief for that comment. Let's see here.
You also had proposed parallel parking originally, and I believe you've reconfigured that parking. Can you point out what you've done with parking on the site?
Yeah, we originally proposed parallel parking along the backs of units 1 through 6. We removed those parking spaces, and we now have 90-degree parking spaces located in this vicinity here, and there's 4 spaces shown.
And you have also modified this to further address his comments with respect to the trail connection as it's shown on the plan today?
Yes.
And you've also provided additional detail for stormwater management on this plan, is that correct?
I did.
With respect to Mr. Heinrich's comments, did you also address his comments, in particular comment 2 of his letter, which is marked as Exhibit B9? He had recommended that the main access driveway be at least 24 feet wide with a corner radii of at least 25 feet. Did you make that change on Exhibit A5?
I did.
With respect to Mr. Heinrich's comments, he also recommended that the internal roads be 20 feet. And what is the width reflected on Exhibit A5 of the internal roads?
They are 20 feet.
Did comment 7 of Mr. Heinrich's review letter reference parallel parking, which you've touched on, and that has been eliminated as part of this?
That's correct.
And per comments 4 and 6 of Mr. Heinrich's letter, did you provide access to the neighboring property And are you providing ADA compliant curb ramps for the pedestrian crossings of the main driveway and for the pedestrian connection at Guthriesville Plaza?
Yes, we are.
And as a result, is this Exhibit A5 the conditional use plan for which the applicant is seeking approval?
Yes.
Have you also reviewed Pannoni's review letter of May 8th, 2018, which we just referenced, B16?
I did.
And with respect to those technical comments, did he confirm that those comments are resolved?
Yes.
Have you prepared a zoning tabulation chart on Exhibit A5 showing the area and bulk requirements for this community?
I did.
And other than the front yard build-to line that's been addressed by Mr. Penders, does the proposed development comply with the applicable area and bulk criteria?
It does.
With respect to that chart, there are several different categories, including height, setbacks, and you do have a category there for common open space. Is any common open space required as part of this development? Is it?
No, it is not.
So there is green area proposed, but there is no zoning ordinance requirement with respect to open space for this property. Is that correct? With respect to density, is the maximum permitted gross density 12 units per acre on this site?
Yes.
And what is the proposed density?
The proposed density is 15.
Well, with respect to units per acre, what is the proposed density?
I believe it's about 11.27.
So while there are 15 units proposed, could you explain how large the tract is, first of all?
The tract is about 1.33 acres, which would technically allow us to have about 16 units on this parcel, but we are proposing 15.
Okay, so the dwelling units per acre are that 11.27 number, but because it is more than an acre, the applicant is proposing 15 dwelling units. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that is compliant with the ordinance?
Correct.
With respect to the street wall functioning as the front yard build-to line on this tract, is there also a structural function in addition to a design element that's already been addressed as to why you're proposing this street wall?
Yes, it's also functioning as a retaining wall.
And touching on, there's been some questions that have touched on, and for other witnesses, with respect to grades on this property, are there a number of steep slopes on this property?
Yes.
And did you participate in and did the applicant obtain special exception and variance relief to permit the buildings and improvements shown here on this plan in areas of steep slopes on March 7th, 2018?
I did participate.
And did they grant that relief?
Yes.
Turning to parking, what is the parking requirement for the proposed use?
The parking requirement is 1.5 parking spaces per unit.
And that would equate to how many parking spaces?
23.
How many parking spaces are proposed as part of the application?
We are proposing 15 garage spaces, 15 driveway spaces, and then 4 additional overflow spaces. So a total of 34 parking spaces.
So that would exceed the ordinance required parking, is that correct?
By 11 spaces, yes.
Turning to stormwater management, were you responsible for the preparation of an exhibit we have marked as Exhibit A16, preliminary hydraulic and hydrologic analysis dated October 19th, 2017?
Yes, I was.
And could you briefly explain what this analysis addresses, as well as the proposed stormwater management for the development?
Yeah, it's a preliminary stormwater analysis that we did to show that we comply with the Township's stormwater management ordinance. We did some infiltration testing, and we came up with this location here for a subsurface infiltration bed, and the infiltration rates were adequate, and so we're proposing to comply with that stormwater management ordinance by showing a subsurface infiltration bed.
Have you had an opportunity to review the standards for conditional use set forth in the zoning ordinance?
I have.
Turning to those standards, I'd like you to address some of them. Is the proposed use limited to one authorized as a conditional use in which the parcel is located?
Yes.
In your opinion, is the proposed use consistent with the purpose of the zoning ordinance to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare?
Yes, I believe it is.
Is there public water available for the site?
There is.
Have you received what we'll call a will serve letter from Aqua dated April 13th, 2018?
I have.
And we have that marked as Exhibit A17. What does that will serve letter confirm that there is water available for the proposed development?
It does.
I think you've already addressed this now, but where would the proposed water connection be made, just to make sure it's clear for the record?
The proposed water line will run through the center of the site into the private road and then tie in down here, right above Horseshoe Pike.
Okay, when you say down here, you would be referring to the
southeastern corner of the property.
on Exhibit A5.
On A5, yes.
Have you also confirmed whether public sewer is available for the site?
Yes, we received a verbal approval from the township's municipal sewer engineer.
And again, where would this public sewer connection be made?
That connection would be made, it would extend from the upper right-hand corner of the property shown on Exhibit A5, and then it will continue through the site to the southwestern corner of the property.
And that would connect into Horseshoe Pike?
Yes. Now it'll connect to the sanitary line on the Guthriesville Plaza's property.
Oh, okay, so on the neighboring property?
Yes.
And there would be, and that is a public sewer connection?
Correct.
With respect to maneuverability through the site, did you prepare a truck turning plan that we have marked as Exhibit A18, which was plotted April 17th, 2018?
I did.
And is this a truck turning template that has been prepared based on Exhibit A5, the current layout that is proposed?
Yes,
And was this submitted to the fire chief for review?
it was.
And did you get confirmation from the fire chief that the truck turning and proposed access for emergency vehicles is adequate?
Yes, we did.
We have marked as Exhibit A19 an email from the fire chief. And have you reviewed that email to confirm that?
I did.
Could you briefly explain what's shown on Exhibit A18 and how a fire truck could maneuver through the site?
Yeah, so the viewport here on the left-hand side is showing a fire truck can properly circulate throughout the site and come out of the secondary access to the Guthriesville Plaza, and it can safely maneuver to each one of the private road segments in front of every one of the township, or every one of the townhouse units. And this right-hand viewport is showing the same thing, except it's showing that a truck can safely make a left-hand turn into the development and safely get to units 1 through 6 without having to back up.
So in your opinion, has the demand for public services and facilities such as water supply, sewage disposal, emergency services, and fire protection been considered, and will the demand for those services be adequately addressed as part of this application through those various public utilities and the access to the site?
Yes.
Are there any fire hydrants proposed in connection with this development?
Yes, we are proposing a fire hydrant between units 11 and 12, located right there.
And that information was also provided to the fire chief?
It was.
And he's confirmed his review of it, is that correct?
I believe so, yeah. No.
So
It
he's,
has not been, the fire hydrant has not yet been approved.
okay,
I apologize.
but he has seen it and you will address any further comments he has on that.
Yes, but it does comply with the township's ordinance where it has to be within 600 feet of every townhouse unit, and the fire hydrant we're showing does comply with that requirement.
I have no further questions for
Board members?
I have a couple of questions. You're indicating that you're relocating the water service line. Does that line service the Hopewell Village community after it traverses through this property?
I believe it does service the Hopewell community prior to traversing this one.
What size is that line?
I don't know what size it is.
So you don't know whether that's the main that services Hopewell or what? Anything?
My understanding it is the main that services, but I'm not entirely certain on that.
All right, the plan that we have is an 8.5 by 11, and I know that there are contours on it, but I'll be honest with you, my old eyes don't allow me to interpret those. So can you tell us, first of all, what the elevation change is from Hopewell Road to the rear property line?
I cannot tell you what the elevation change is between Hopewell Road and the rear property line, but I can tell you what the elevation change is from the rear property line to 322.
Where's she
I think.
That's what you meant. You said Hopewell.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, getting
I'm
late.
sorry. Yeah.
That's
Thank
what he
you.
wants.
If you would.
Okay.
It wasn't a trick. Who's still awake? Let's go.
The elevation change up here in the upper left corner of the property, this elevation is 530, and then the elevation in 322 is about 498. So we're looking at a good 32-foot height difference.
And what can you tell me what the difference? We'll just take the ridge, the top of the ridge for units 1 through 6, and the elevation or the difference between 1 through 6 ridge line and 7 through 11 ridge line.
About a 7-foot difference.
All right, thank you.
I did, that was on Exhibit 7 in Seidel's report. Does the changing of the water line, two things, does it change the sewer and the water line, does it change the easement that's currently in place? And then second, does that create a new easement going down the center of the said property for the water line?
Yes, it would. We would have to extinguish the existing easement that runs through the runs along the eastern property line, and since the utility lines are going to be separate, we would then propose a 20-foot easement for each one of those.
So is that going to change anything with their concerns earlier with the fence?
No, the fence, as I have shown on my plan, will have to stop where the existing easement comes onto our proposed property, which is at that location right here.
So can I follow up on that just because I'm confused? So is the pipe, I know there's an easement, but is the actual pipe, and I guess there's two pipes, there's a water pipe and a sewer pipe. Are they, the location of those pipes as they enter the development property, they'll stay the same and they'll continue down towards Route 322 and at some point then they'll break off into the new easements that you're describing?
Yes, well, the water line will break off into the new easement right at the northeastern corner of our property. It'll break off into the new easement at this location here, which will run in this direction. The sanitary line will have to be slightly rerouted to the east so that we have adequate space between the sanitary line and unit 15, and that new easement will run down. Actually, the easement will pretty much stay the same along the eastern property line here for the sanitary line. But it wouldn't be as wide because the water line would not be within that easement.
So there's no ability to reconfigure the easement on the adjoining landowner in order to address their concerns about being able to put some sort of buffer, plant, fence or something? You're not proposing that any portion of those pipes be changed?
No.
Okay.
All right, so that touches upon the next thing with your landscape architect. You have white pines. I know they're big roots, but I don't know, is that going to affect the root system in the water line now that you're going behind the properties and then coming down the center? And then he had just opined that there would be 2 white pines on 11 and 12 corner, and that's going to be right where your water line's coming down again. Is that going to affect the water line with those white pines right on the, for the landscape architect maybe better suited?
I would defer that to the
Yeah.
landscape architect.
Especially if that water line's moving across the rear property now.
Sure. For the record, Brian Seidel. No, I don't believe that's going to have a significant conflict in terms of what we're proposing in that area. There is a larger area on the adjacent to Unit 12. Provides a little bit more room. If necessary, we could provide smaller shrubs, or I'm sorry, smaller tree or smaller growing species between the water line and Unit 11. If we can still provide that.
And then who's going to dictate the easement? Would that be Aqua?
Down that guy, so you can't put something there.
And here's why I ask this, because this could really throw the situation with this group here for Hopewell. If they come in and say that they want a 20-foot easement again, you're not planting trees where you thought you were.
Well, I mean, there's still going to be space for there to be trees along the property line up here. But yes, you are correct. We would have to take into account the easement.
I would just, maybe mark that as a consideration, because that may be a big sticking point with these guys.
Yes, we'll take a further look at that.
Anything else? Jason, do you have any questions?
Is there common open space on this plan? I know it's not required, but would you consider any of it common open space?
I mean, we do have these sitting areas here where essentially where the subsurface infiltration bed is, which could be treated as gathering area.
So is that comprised of a minimum of 10% of the gross area?
But we're not required to provide that.
But it says if you do provide it, it needs to be at least 10%. I don't know if that's going to affect the HOA.
No, I guess the easy answer is here, no, we are not proposing any open space.
Okay. And what's the current zoning for the adjacent properties?
I have that.
You mean what district is it in? Is that what you mean?
Like just what they're zoned for as far as.
I think they're TND1 as well. Aren't I think the adjacent parcels are also zoned TND1.
So wouldn't this use possibly not safeguard the adjacent properties uses? As far as like right now, for example, you have Village Hardware to the east, and if you're proposing multi-family townhomes with no commercial or non-residential on the first floor, wouldn't that alter that property next door though?
How so?
Opinion? Well, you're creating a use is a conditional use which is a little bit inconsistent with a comprehensive plan.
It's a permitted use in the district.
Right.
What is? What isn't the permitted use residential on the second floor and non-residential on the first floor?
No, otherwise
Wasn't that the whole
we would
point
not,
of TND?
not be here tonight if it wasn't permitted.
Right, so multifamily dwellings, which are townhomes, are permitted by conditional use in the TND1 district. That's what the subject of this application is. So when Ms. Zaro says they're permitted, it's not, there's three types of uses under zoning. There's a permitted use, which just requires a permit from the zoning officer. There's a special exception, which requires approval from the zoning hearing board, which this applicant had to go in order to disturb steep slope areas. And then there's a conditional use, which only the Board of Supervisors can approve after a public hearing process. So in the TND1 district, which this particular property is zoned, as well as the adjoining properties to both the east and west, they're all three in the TND1 district. Any three of those properties are permitted by conditional use of the board to have multifamily dwellings. So that's what the zoning ordinance legislates and allows as uses on these parcels, any parcels in the TND1 district.
I understand that, but
Okay.
if
So let me just
permitted
say,
use by conditional use with
It's
with multifamily townhomes, right?
by conditional use, yes,
Conditional use, so it's permitted, not permitted by right.
that's correct.
And
But the
so
law on
certain
conditional use
properties,
is that
commercial,
the law on conditional use is that if the applicant can meet the objective criteria in the ordinance for the particular use, for multifamily use, then the board must approve the conditional use unless protestants can present evidence that this particular multifamily development will have a more detrimental impact upon the surrounding properties, than you would ordinarily see from multifamily use. That's what the legal burden is for conditional use.
no, I understand that. I guess maybe I'm not relaying it or communicating effectively. If for TND, what's the purpose for TND? Is that considered
That's more
for the
of a
definition?
planning question, I don't know that.
Well,
Definition of,
yeah, I mean, I think the TND districts is gonna have, it's probably 39938, I think, is gonna have purpose statements. The intent in the TND1 district is found in section 399-38, so.
what is that?
It says, the TND1 Traditional Neighborhood Development District is intended to reflect and support the properties and uses that are predominant in the village of Guthriesville, and to assure that new uses or changes in use and the dimensional and design standards to which they must adhere are compatible with traditional, compact neighborhood commercial character and complementary residential uses within the village. Unobtrusive transition to the surrounding residential districts is to be achieved. The district seeks to limit and appropriately manage highway-oriented business uses. The standards of the TND1 district also are intended to address potential concerns relating to pedestrian and vehicular access and off-street parking. And then it gives a couple other, try to accomplish the following: provide a manual of written and graphic design guidelines, improve the function and appearance of Guthriesville Village as a means of implementing the comprehensive plan, place buildings to help form a streetscape, provide opportunities for infill development and redevelopment consistent with existing buildings that are located close to streets and other access ways, provide street walls to form a traditional neighborhood character, and provide for off-street parking at the rear or side of buildings. So those are the delineated purpose statements for the TND1 district.
So it's mostly business and commercial and residential. And I guess the point of my question is, if this conditional use application would be approved as strictly multifamily, all residential, how does that affect Village Hardware if they were to become, say that building comes up for sale, now you're creating a situation, is that considered a conforming use, non-conforming use? Because if it goes a year, say, on the market and they close down, because now they're in the TND, does that make sense?
Well, whatever's there today on the adjacent properties has the right to continue because it was lawful when it started. It probably also is still a permitted use in the TND1 district. So somebody coming in who purchased that property would have the right to do any of the uses that are set forth in section 399-39. I think the existing use could continue, and I mean, they could do the same thing that this applicant has done. If they wanted to remove the existing commercial use and put multifamily, they would have to go through this hearing process just like the applicant.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask the same questions as the landscaper, so that's probably it for right now.
I have a question for you. Is there anything in Pannoni's review letter that we marked B16 that you can't comply with? Obviously, he points out the setback or the minimum build-to line, which
Right.
you sought a modification, but is there anything else that's causes a concern?
No, I don't
And
believe so.
Ms. Zara went through
I'm
some,
sorry, was it B19 or B16?
B16.
For the, I think,
That's what I said, I think, didn't I? B16. If I didn't, I apologize. Okay, sorry. Ms. Zara went through Andy Heinrich's review letter. Is there anything in Mr. Heinrich's review letter that you cannot comply with?
No, there is not.
Okay. You talked about the parking and the ordinance that only requires 1.5 spaces, but in your experience designing multifamily development plans, do you think that the number of parking spaces that are provided on this plan is going to be sufficient?
I believe, yeah, in my professional opinion, I believe so. You know, the driveways that are proposed are wide enough to also include a smaller vehicle. So technically, you have the garage space and you have 2 vehicles in a driveway that would fit, and then you also have some additional overflow.
So these are all one-car garage townhomes, and you're saying that you can fit 2 smaller vehicles within the driveway?
Yes.
What happens when somebody has a party? Where are these people going to park?
I'm not sure. I mean, we're complying with the ordinance.
Okay, just didn't know if that was ever something that you had discussed with the applicant in terms of overflow parking, other than the 4 spaces you're providing.
No, it is not.
Okay, I have nothing further. Anybody else on the board?
oh, just, you had said that you had no problem complying with Pannoni's letter. Is that including some of the outstanding issues, such as the maximum front yard build to line 12 feet exceeded, I mean.
No, Allison jumped in there and said
Okay, I'm sorry.
excluding that.
Okay.
that
all
They're
right.
seeking a modification from
Yep,
the board on that.
I didn't hear,
Yeah.
I apologize. Yeah, I'm good. The only other thing I was gonna say is, I know you did make note of a fire truck being able to make the radius. I've recently, another development, been notified by the HOA that was one of their biggest disappointments in us, the Board of Supervisors allowing something that did conform to the fire truck being able to fit, and in their opinion, it's not the case. So is this something we could also, depending upon what the outcome is of this, make it conditional on the fire marshal to confirm a site visit and his recommendation? Sometimes, you know, a sketch drawing is a little different than an actual fire truck making a, you know, test run in a maybe a quarantined area or something to your specs with cones, and see if he could make that turn with what we have apparatus wise.
I just want to throw out there, in my experience with the simulator program that we use, the program tends to be more conservative than reality, is one thing I've noticed.
Did you review the truck turning plans with the fire chief, or did he only review the conditional use plan?
He did review this truck turning plan.
And did he review Exhibit A5? Because he has an email to you, but I was curious if he had reviewed the most recent plan.
Just to clarify, so Exhibit A18 is a truck turning plan, and Chris, that's based on Exhibit A5, is that correct? It's
Yes, it
that
is,
layout.
with respects to the width of the roads
And
and
then,
the turning radii.
and that
That's
truck
correct.
turning plan was then submitted to the fire chief, and then he reviewed that latest truck turning plan based on the current plan.
That's correct.
Yeah, I just don't want to miss that one again. As I say, it conformed the last time, but apparently it's still an issue, so I wanted to.
We can have our own conversation with fire chief and make sure.
Yeah, I talked to him
We
today.
can talk to him. Well, we can deal with that. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the parties, if anybody has questions for this witness.
Scott Brown, 102 Cherry Grove Lane. Okay, where do I start here? Okay, is this a two-access driveway? Two-access driveway here, off of 322?
There's one access off of 322.
Okay, I mean, and then,
And there's a secondary access to the Guthrie'sville Plaza.
so it's two-way, I can go in and out the both
Yes.
okay.
Chris, the court reporter's not gonna really hear you with your
Oh, I'm
back, so
sorry.
try to
I know, this
maybe
is-
sit, maybe go.
No mic, so, or it's
Okay.
a sort of
Okay.
that's your mic.
All right. And what is the total height of the wall from street level to the top of the wall, including the slope? So I know that it's what is the height of the wall from its bottom point to its top point of the barrier wall?
I'm sorry, which wall exactly are you referring to?
I wish we had another. Okay, so if we were to turn to, I believe it was a 10, a nice, the front wall.
A9, probably the
A9,
architectural
A9.
rendering.
Yes, the one that borders 320, the face of 322. Yes, A9.
Can you put that up, Chris? Can
Yeah,
you?
I can.
Here's a big
We have a
one.
large size version of it,
Oh, right.
Chris.
Here we go. So the height of this wall here and on that far side.
So, beginning at this end here of the wall, this is about 7 feet high.
The western side.
West side, yes.
The western side of the wall is 7 feet high, and then it gradually goes down, working your way east. I'm going to actually defer to John with regards to the height of the sitting wall. Do we know how high that wall is going to be? Not on my plan, no.
On Exhibit A7, there is a sight line. Now, I'm not sure if this is old or new, but there is a side. It's a few pages in. Allison, this one here.
The cross section. The cross section is actually also part of A1. There's a separate, a larger size version of that. The proposed cross section. 17, is that what you're referring to?
I mean, I don't know the exact height of that section of the wall, but I would say between 2 and 3 feet.
Yeah, the sitting wall component, when it moves to the eastern end of the property, was designed to be 30 inches for a seating height there, where it no longer has any structural component to it as a retaining wall.
Thanks, John.
Right, and what is the total height from curb? Curb height. What's the total curb height from the 322 to the top of the curb?
You know, we were proposing about an 8-inch high curb. The existing curb that runs along 322, I do not know its exact height.
So but you're saying it'll be 8 when you're done on your plans. All right, and what's the total height of that slope? I don't need the degree of the slope, but the total height of the slope from the top of the curb to the bottom of the wall.
I'm not sure I exactly follow you. Exactly where you're
From the bottom of
referring to. You're
322
referring to right here? This location here?
There is a degree of height between the total height. What is the total height of on the west wall? If you have the 7 inches, you have a curb of 7 feet. You have a curb of 8 inches. There is grass that has a slope. It's not flat, so you have slope, sidewalk, wall, curb. Total height of from 322 to the top of that wall. Do you have that?
I don't know exactly what it is, but the minimum slope will be 2%, and the maximum would be 33%.
Total. So you don't know what that final slope will be.
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to scale it off in my drawing.
Okay. So okay. So I'm obviously looking at something here. So based on guidelines, and so the total distance from the curb to the driveway on 1 through 1 and 6. What is that? I need both the elevation from 322 to the front of those units and the distance from 322 to the front of those units, or the front of the driveway.
Wait, so what was the first?
First one is elevation from 322, the curb, to the front point of the driveways of units 1 to 6, if you have that.
The front point of the driveways is on average an elevation of 503. And the top of grade elevation for this inlet located due south of the center of those units is 497. So there's a 6-foot difference there.
6 feet. Okay. Oh, good. All right. So what is the total then, or what is the total slope from the one end, from the east end of your plot to the west? So where Village Hardware is to where the Brandywine shops are. What is the total slope?
What's the elevation change?
Yeah, I'm sorry, going from east to west. What is that total elevation change?
In line with units 1 through 6, drawing a straight line, let's say from this 524 contour here, straight across to about 4 feet.
4 feet. Okay. You don't know what that would be in percentage or degree slope then? All right. So, okay, so my concern is that board is, if you could tell me what the actual site distance is, since this is a 2-lane road, do you know what the minimum site distance is from, let's say, the far end of Village Hardware to your first driveway entrance there?
Our traffic engineers here.
Okay, I'll ask him.
After me.
All right, so then I guess a lot of these are going to be for him. And also, I guess I do have a question for you then, is emergency vehicles. I noticed you had the ladder truck. It was my understanding that the ladder truck wasn't the only vehicle of concern for the fire department. Did you assess all the trucks with the fire department or just the ladder truck?
I worked with the township on utilizing the newest fire truck, which they plan on having delivered this September per their direction, and that's the truck that I utilized for.
That's just so the new ladder truck?
Yes.
Did you assess the other trucks as well? There's more than the one ladder truck. My understanding is that there's a concern that one of the other trucks does not. The ladder truck isn't of greater concern, that there's another vehicle that the fire department has that needs to be assessed. So the board, that's something I want to bring up, I guess, for condition that we have to consider. because ladder truck might make it, but if another one doesn't, we have a problem. Tanker, or I forget which one it was, but I do recall hearing that there was another truck that was an issue.
But again, I just want to reiterate this: the truck turning plan was submitted to the township, and the fire chief did approve the plan.
Understand. As a concerned citizen, though, I want to make sure all bases are covered. All right, that's all I have.
Jason Warner, 112 Cherry Grove Lane. I want to revisit the topic of the easement, specifically the sewer. It is currently a 40-foot easement, and that is because it's co-located with the water line. However, when you separate the sewer line, it still remains a 20-foot easement. Is that correct on either side? Or, and I guess my question is, who determines that easement? That's the first part of the question. Is who determines that? Is that are there county? Are there state?
It's whoever's the owner of the easement. So for sewer, it's going to be the township's municipal authority, and for water, it's going to be Aqua.
Okay, but do they have published standards on these?
Yeah, there are standards and specifications, and the recorded easements probably specify the dimension of the easement.
Okay, so, but to reduce that, they're going to have to apply to.
They're not reducing it. They're going to maintain a 20-foot easement for both the water and the sewer.
Got it. See, upon looking on the drawing, I find it difficult to believe that it won't actually infringe on the eastern boundary of the property. If you look at the, if you go 20 feet in either direction of the new proposed sewer line, I think it moves into Village Hardware property.
20 feet total.
20 feet total.
The 10 feet.
Yeah,
Not 20 feet on either side.
It's a 20-foot total, so they center, the rule of thumb is to try to center the line within that 20-foot.
But it is currently 40 feet, right?
That's because they're two concurrent.
Okay, and when you separate it by right, it automatically decreases to 20?
Correct, yes. It would be, the standard would be 20-foot with the line centered, whether it's a sewer line or a water line.
Okay. Within the, so the plan does include relocating the sewer line, and is there any construction on that sewer line, or water line for that matter, outside of the property being discussed? Will there be any work on the adjacent properties?
No utility work on the adjacent properties. I just wanted to clear, we do have some disturbance proposed, but that's on the western property line where we obtained an easement.
Okay. Will there be any disruption to service, either sewer or water, to any of the adjacent properties during this relocation, and if so, how long?
That would be up to the utility companies.
Okay.
Up to who?
Up to the utilities.
Companies?
How do we get that on record today?
Yeah. Do you have any idea of what that will be, how long that will take, and what the disruption will be?
I do not know, no.
Okay. So I guess let the record show that this has not been addressed. With respect to the western side, with the adjoining road into, I guess that's Brandywine Plaza, is that what it's called? Guthersville Plaza? Guthersville Plaza. Is the slope, what is the slope of that road, the connecting road? I see that little, it looks like about a quarter of a circle. Approximately what's the elevation difference between the existing plaza and the new road as it ends on the property?
From this point?
Yes, from there down to the property line. What is the approximate elevation difference there?
The elevation difference is 2 feet.
Okay. That's it for my questions.
Yeah, just one quick one. What is the minimum parking space size per space? Is there one for the township? I noticed these are 6 by 18. Does that meet the minimum requirement for the township?
Where do you see 6?
6 feet wide by 18
Where do you
feet
see
deep.
6?
Looks like 9.
Oh, is it 9?
No, that's probably, it's small pictures.
All right, so yeah, okay, so if it's 9 by 18, does that meet minimum requirement? It's great you have parking spaces there, but if really they don't meet the requirements and it really should only be 3, then, you know, just Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. That's all I have.
Dave Graff, 26 Wellesley Lane. 2 quick questions for you, Christopher. Number one, and to the board, would we be inclined to see a diminished water pressure when you tap into the main line to create the diversion into the township homes?
Again, I don't want to be put on the record by saying anything that I'm not comfortable with addressing, so I would defer that to the utility companies.
It's the call for the main needs to be increased. I believe Aqua stated that the main would have to be increased. At least that's what I read.
There has to be an extension to the main, is what they're saying. A new main being installed on this property to provide service to this property. So that this property owner, if they get approvals during land development, will have to memorialize legal agreements with Aqua to be able to have an easement and the installation of a water main on this property. But as far as what will happen, I mean, we can explore that probably more during land development.
Okay.
Happy to do that. That's really a detail that would get worked through during land development.
Sounds good.
But we can also ask, we don't have the township engineer here tonight, and we can ask those questions. I've taken some notes on some of the concerns raised by the neighbors, and we can follow up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Last question for you. The study that you did with the fire truck, was that with cars based on your parking scenario and overflow, or was that done with an empty lot?
No, that's assuming that there are cars in the overflow parking spaces.
Okay.
And of course, in the driveways.
I'm Raj Mahimiraj, 110 Cherry Grove Lane. My question is very simple. When I have a birthday party, I get 25 guest cars. When Jobin he has another 25. So we are okay to park 50 cars on Cherry Grove Lane. All right. So we are okay. You can park on Wellesley Lane. I park on Cherry Grove Lane. 50 cars, no problem. If the same 50 cars come here, first question, where will they park? Number 2, will they park on 322? 322 is already single lane road. And number 3, God forbid, if there's a fire accident at the time, how will the fire trucks get in and help people? That's all. Thank you.
Was that a question? What was your question?
That was more of a statement.
How will they park 50 cars, additional guest cars? Number 2, in that case, if in the event.
The question is, how do you park 50 cars?
50 guest cars.
Again, the amount of parking we're proposing complies with the township ordinance.
And what is that, please?
The ordinance requires that 1.5 parking stalls be provided per unit. We have 15 units, so then we're required to provide 23 parking spaces.
That is for the residents or for the guests?
Everyone, as part of the development.
So you understand, the zoning ordinance has a minimum number of parking spaces per every use. And what he's saying is that their plan meets the minimum requirement in the zoning code. So the zoning ordinance doesn't specify or have a requirement for the guests of the townhouse development. Probably the thought being that in a village setting, there would be other locations for parking. That's my guess.
Right, that's what I'm trying to bring it up. On one Cherry Grove Lane, we have enough space, length, breadth, all over the place. There is no problem. But in this case, we are right on 322, which is already congested. It takes 30 minutes for me to get from Hope Hill intersection to 30 bypass in the morning. So where are we going to park the additional guest parking? That's my first thing. Second thing, when there is such a party going on, God forbid, in the event if there's a fire accident, how is going to be multiple fire trucks coming from different places to get in to help the people? That's all. Thank you. Please answer that. Thanks.
I'm not sure that's really a question. I think that's your commentary and your comment, and the board will take it under advisement, but I don't think that's really a question for him. I mean, he can't answer that hypothetical.
This is practical.
Okay, your point is taken. Any other questions specific to his testimony?
Jobin Belleville, 25 Wellesley Lane. My question is, how atypical from the average development in East Brandywine is this proposed application?
Not sure I object.
All right,
to
let me
that.
ask you, what is the percentage? This is 15 townhomes in a space of 1.1 acres, 1.3 acres. What is the average space for residents in the East Brandywine Township? And how atypical is this application from that?
I think the answer to your question is we've never had a previous TND application, so this is the first one to come under this ordinance.
And the other thing is we have to keep our questions related to what his knowledge is going to be for him.
All right. He's a professional engineer, right?
Examined all the different developments in East Brandywine, so it's not a fair question.
Okay, so then let me ask, who would be able to answer that question?
I would object to that question in general because the application needs to be reviewed based on the property today. We're not comparing this to other properties.
Why would it not be fair to compare to other properties or other developments in the East Brandywine Township that exist today? And how far from norm of an application is this, considering?
Because other developments may have and were developed under different ordinances and different design standards. So you're comparing apples to oranges. Applicants are entitled to develop their property based on the standards in place at the time they file their application, which is what this application is all about.
Agreed, but at the time of the application, I want to know how off variance is this particular application to existing landscape.
I would object. It's not relevant.
And this witness can't answer it anyway, so.
Agreed, but I'm asking,
right now, it's questions for this witness. So if you have a question for this witness, now's an appropriate time. He cannot answer that question.
what is the highest point of the back lot or the back set of buildings from street level? Or what is the height difference from 322 to the top of the highest building?
The garage floor elevation to those units on average would be around 512. So you're looking at about a 15-foot difference between grade, and then the building height for those is around 35 feet. So then add 35 feet to that.
So there's a 50-foot, the highest peak of the building or the set of buildings is 50 foot from 322.
Approximately 50 feet.
Right. That does significantly alter the current viewpoint from 322 as it exists right now.
I just want to keep in mind that, you know, we're sloping up towards the development back there.
Agreed.
We're not just filling in. We're not just throwing dirt back there and adding fill and increasing the elevation. It's just part of the natural topography.
Agreed. And one more question. This was related to the description of TND. There was a portion that you read out loud that dealt with side and rear parking on the TND description.
It's a question for this witness. I don't believe that this witness read the TND ordinance, so I would object.
I think he made reference to it. Based off of my comment.
So I read the purpose statement for the TND.
399-38-C.
Right, and said the TND district is designed to accomplish the following. The last one was provide off-street parking at the rear or side of buildings. So do you have a question for this witness specific to that intent?
I would object that this is not the time for statements. You need to.
Yeah, do you have a is your question to this witness, does it comply with that intent?
There you go.
Okay.
You know, again, through previous testimony, yes, all the units do have parking proposed in the front, but you know, we're doing everything we can by providing a, you know, sitting wall in the front of the property to shield those driveways from 322 as best as we can.
So I guess I'll ask the question, where is the rear and side parking in this plan?
The parking is proposed in front of the units in the driveways.
There is no rear and side parking, okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I actually have a
The
question.
record show that clear or not complying with the intent or the red intent of the PND description.
Sure. I have a couple of questions. Scott Paulus, 108 Cherry Grove. One of the outstanding issues on, not even sure what the document's called, but the answer to the Pannoni letter. B16. Issue number 10, traffic study was never submitted. I do think you do have a traffic person here tonight.
Yes, he will. He'll be addressing traffic.
Okay. Do we know why there has never been a formal request for a traffic study?
That would be something that the board would request. That's what the ordinance states, and we have not been requested to submit a traffic study at this point in time.
Okay. Would the board consider requesting one of those?
I believe our traffic engineer did comment,
He did not request a traffic study.
but he came up with the peak trips during the afternoon and with the fees, and you agreed.
And
Those fees.
and we do have information about traffic.
Okay,
Our
great.
Our witness will testify
Sure.
to that. Yeah.
In regards to open space, I've heard multiple times that you're not required to have open space. Do you know why there's no requirement for open space?
That's
No,
an
that's a question
ordinance.
for the township.
It's an ordinance requirement. There's no ordinance requirement for it.
Okay. What, is there a requirement for impervious surface?
No more than 85%.
Chris, you can answer that question.
Yes. Yes, there is a requirement for impervious surface. It's 85%, and our plan is showing 57%.
So you don't meet the requirements?
He's
No,
below
the
it.
maximum impervious allowed
Okay.
on this property is 85%. We're proposing 57%.
Okay. I think earlier I asked a question. I think they said that you might be the guy to answer it. Do you know how close Unit 7 is to the trail that's existing there, the actual fence?
Right scale. Looking at about 5 feet.
They can't, it has to be on the record.
Right. Right.
Yes,
It-
edge of the building to the edge of the trail.
Yeah, I think during my research that isn't there a 10-foot requirement from the building to the edge of the track line?
There is, and we do comply with that requirement.
How is it compliant if it's 5 feet?
A portion of the trail is located on our property.
Just to clarify, the setback is from the lot line, and then you had specifically asked what is the setback from the building to the trail. The trail is not the lot line. There's not a setback from the trail per se under the ordinance.
You're saying the lot line goes past the trail?
The trail is within the lot line on the property, yes. It does not have to be on the lot line. It can be within our property. Within that area, that setback area.
Okay.
Scott Brown, 102 Cherry Grove Lane. Does the side yard requirement, is the side yard requirement met of 10 feet for each unit? Side yards? So you're saying that there are yards for these units?
No, the side yard for the tract is met for the proposed units.
Is it my understanding that you have to, for each of these townhomes, you have to have a 10-foot side yard requirement? Am I mistaken on that? Not the 10 feet from the tract. I'm not talking about the offset. I'm talking about the actual yard.
That would not be possible for a townhouse unit. If every townhouse unit had to have a separate side yard, it couldn't
Correct.
be a townhouse unit.
The end units have that requirement then?
Yes.
And they meet that every townhouse
First
meets that
answer
requirement?
sorry.
Okay.
One last question. So the road down the middle, is it equally as wide as the road that comes in from 322?
This road here is 20 feet wide, and then the main access drive is 24 feet wide.
What is the minimum by township standards?
I believe the minimum is, I know we comply with the minimum, but I do not know what the minimum requirement is off the top of my head.
I thought the minimum was more than 20.
It might be the difference between a public road and a private road as far as the standards. I don't know if Mr. Heinreich, the township traffic engineer, did review it and recommended the dimensions that are on Exhibit A5. So according to the township's traffic engineer, these dimensions meet the township code requirements.
You may or may not be able to answer this. I know I said last question, but it's never last question. What is the reason that the sidewalk for this community is tied into the sidewalk that goes into our community?
Just to provide, additional circulation for residents that would like to have an extension to their walking path.
All right, I know I said we're going to try and wrap this up around 10 tonight. What I'd like, if we can do any further questions, maybe finish him out, and then that way we start from scratch with your fourth on our...
Whatever date, yeah.
Yes, that
So
makes
if there's
sense.
any other questions for the
Civil engineer.
civil engineer.
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
does actual development go into play here? Questions about how they're going to be building. Have they done any land tests? The rock, we know there's rock there. And
Mr. Brown, those are normally more detailed questions you get into during land development.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
Yep, very good.
I do have one more question. My only question is, I assume we're taking a break and we'll come back another time to wrap this up. If anything else does arise, questions that we have that would be questions for this gentleman or even Mr. Penders or anyone else, would we have an opportunity, would he be present at the next portion to be able to, if something else came up, that we could ask him a question at that point?
Mr. Penders, I'm sure, will be here. He is the applicant. As to whether or not Mr. Daly's here, I guess, why don't you let Mrs. Zarro know whether or not you're going to have questions? That way she can plan.
Well, we'll just consider that we will have questions then.
Well, I don't think that's.
I mean,
fair.
it's-
I think if you're
well-
going to have questions for him, you'll know that in advance, and you can.
So are you requesting that I email them?
No,
I
I'm
mean,
just no. I'm not asking you to tell us. What
I
the
was just
questions are.
asking if he'd be present. So
I can be present if I need to be.
Typically, when we're done with the witness, we don't necessarily bring that witness back unless we know that they need to be available. So I
Right.
think
So
that's
what I'm
why
saying
Ms.
is, if
Camp
you have specific questions that you come up with between now and the next hearing, let us know, and we'll let the applicant know, and they'll make him available.
thank you.
You don't have to tell us your questions, just the availability.
Okay. So right now we're going to go off the record and try. Oh, go ahead.
Jason had one question.
Parking requirements, I know it's 1.5 per, but I guess 1.5 per dwelling unit for this application. Parking inside of a garage, is that considered off-street parking? Is that considered valid, or does it have to be outside of the actual building on their driveway? I'm just for clarity. Can you use inside someone's garage as off-street parking?
There was no specific mention of it in the township ordinance, so
I don't know.
I would think yes.
Hmm?
In my opinion, yes, it would be.
It was not raised as an issue in the Pannoni letter, so I believe that that's the consistent.
I'm just curious because I don't know if that was, because if you have two people over, that you have to have that person leave the garage. That's all, because it says that the parking spaces are going to be, your proposal says 15 garage spaces and 15 10 by 22 spaces. But I was just thinking that if it was going to meet the criteria, it had to be, 15 feet wide by 20 feet to get the, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I'm just from general clarification.
If I could just jump in on one point of clarification on the math side with Chris. Practically speaking, in my view, living day to day, there are 3 spaces on each lot. 1 in the garage, 2 in front of each with the 2-car driveway, plus the overflow.
Okay.
In terms of meeting the letter of your ordinances, we were not counting all 3 of those spaces on each lot. So we're talking a lot about how many spaces are there really in events, guests, everything else. It's really 3 times, so you have 45 plus what we count as the overflow off of the lots themselves at above the basin.
Okay.
So the 49 total. But again, in terms of a strict reading of your ordinance, we can't count all of those to the points that you just raised.
That's what I was wondering.
I believe there may even be something interpreting the fact that if you can't pull the car out directly, it doesn't count. So you can either count 2 in the drive.
Sure.
Or you can count 1 in the garage and 1 in the drive.
Okay.
Sort of a practical equivalent.
Okay, that answers my question.
But in terms of ordinance required parking, just to sort of summarize and wrap that up, for the ordinance required parking dimensionally, we meet the requirement for those 23 spaces of the I know there was a question raised about the guest parking, but that's extra parking, that's not ordinance required. Is that correct?
It is extra parking.
Okay, thank you. I think we are going to go off the record now. And then
About June 7th? Okay. We had talked about June 7th. Yeah. We're good. June 7th as a continuation date. Are there?
7 p.m.
7 p.m.? Does that work for, the applicant and the board is available that evening? Does that work for most of the parties?
Works for the applicant.
Yeah. Okay, June 7th, 7 p.m. No further notices will be provided.
maybe Luke want to put it on the website?
Website? Shortly. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you June 7th.